If you prefer cats to dogs, raise your hands. Okay, just a few cat lovers. If you prefer dogs to cats, raise your hands. Well, thank you. Okay. If you prefer to save the money and get a Sky Sports subscription, save your hands. Yeah, a few of us for the summer internationals there. Well, we had a cat called Blackie. He was a ginger Tom, and he wasn't. We had this cat called Blackie, and at the time, I was living in Huddersfield, which is up in the frozen north of England. I'm from Bradford originally, and when I got married, we moved across to Huddersfield, and then I finally moved down to Warwickshire, as my wife tells me I've got to call it. Okay, and when one particular morning I was coming down our house, and we lived in one of these kind of new estates, you know, where the houses look very similar, but it was a new estate in as much as 7 or 8 different designers, and it had a gym in the middle, which, as you can tell, I used a lot. And you don't start making your own jokes up now, okay? And I remember one particular morning, I'd come down, I'd got up, I'd come downstairs to make a cup of tea, and as I made a cup of tea, we had this cat called Blackie, as I mentioned, and he came in through the cat flap, and I was feeding Blackie. I was putting food, and I think that's probably why he came in. I was putting food in his bowls and some water, fresh water, and he came through the cat flap, and he came right close up to me, and forgive me, but I noticed that he had a wound on his bottom, okay? He had quite a bad wound on his bottom, and I don't spend my life doing that, but I could just see because he was there, you know, and just need a bit of clarification here, and as I turned to Blackie to kind of give him a bit of love, I happened to notice he'd got a wound above his, I think it was his right eye. So he had a wound on the bottom and a wound above his right eye, and they looked a little bit infected. They looked quite bad. So I said to my wife, I'm going to take him to Pets R Us. I just need to point out there are other veterinary places on the market also. But we took him to Pets R Us, and we took him into the little kind of surgery, and the vet stuck him on what basically resembled a large, high concrete slab with a rubber mat. And there was a lot of gouges in the rubber mat where various pets had obviously had uncomfortable moments in their lives. And the vet took one look at Blackie. He looked at the wound on his bottom. He looked at the wound above his right eye, and he said, oh, yes, it's easy to see what's happened here. And I thought, this will be interesting. So I said, dear vet type person, please tell me what you think, looking at those 2 wounds, what you think is so easy to see that has happened here. And he said to me, Blackie's come down your cul-de-sac. And I thought, how do you know that? From a wound. It freaked me a little bit because I do live in a cul-de-sac, so that was slightly worrying. And then he said, Blackie's come past a hedge. And I thought, again, how do you know that? From the wound. He said, and as Blackie's come past the hedge, a cat has jumped out from behind the hedge, has clawed Blackie on the right eye. Blackie has turned around to run away, and in doing so, the cat has got one lucky last swipe. And he was serious. So I said, Mr. Vet type person, let me tell you what I think has happened. Blackie potentially has indeed come down the cul-de-sac. We both don't really know, but I know we have a cul-de-sac, so I can say with a bit more assurance. Blackie has potentially indeed walked past the hedge. We both don't know, though I know there's a hedge, so I could probably say with a little bit more assurance. But this is where we differ, Mr. Vet type person, because Blackie was bought in Bradford. Blackie doesn't run away from Huddersfield cats. Blackie is hard as they come in Bradford. Let me tell you what, Blackie's been out on the town. No, he's not been out the town. He's been doing some charitable acts. Because he may be hard as nails, but he's got a soft interior. And so Blackie's come past, and he's walked past the hedge, and a cat has jumped out and clawed, first of all, Blackie on the bottom. And then Blackie has turned around to front up to the 25 other cats. And in doing so, sustained a further injury on his right eye. But you should see the state of the other 25 cats. That's my interpretation of the evidence. That's what I suggest to you really happened. Further survey, ladies and gentlemen. Who goes with the vet's explanation of what happened? You're going to be charged anything extra for anything you buy now, sir. Who goes with my personal explanation? Nobody, right? Okay. That's a little bit disheartening. Who thinks it was something completely different? Okay, all right, okay. Who doesn't really know? Again, who's not really bothered? You are no support here whatsoever. I've left my family to come and speak, and there's no support. The truth is, neither the vet nor I were there to experience it, and yet the evidence supports both of our explanations. Does that make sense? Neither of us had first-hand experience of what took place, but for both of us, the facts, loose facts in inverted commas, can support both our particular arguments. In truth, this notion or this challenge that anything you can't see, you can't believe in, is actually poor. And it's not the way that any of us really believe or work out. We don't apply that logic to much in life, in truth, despite, and of course, this was only really kind of encouraged that through some of the enlightenment that we have to be able to scientifically prove everything, i.e. observe everything, and we'll come on to that in a few moments' time. But I've discovered, forgive me, this in life, that proof is the subjective interpretation of evidence. Proof is the subjective interpretation of evidence. I can prove something by looking at the evidence as much as you can often prove the opposite by looking at the same piece of evidence. And to say that science has disproved or proved it either way actually is just not true. There's there's an old debate that has kind of always been there, and at various stages in time it's kind of raised in its prominence. It's been reasonably silent for a little while, but just in the last kind of 3 or 4 years, it's kind of begun to kind of get some resurgence and some momentum. And this is the debate, genuine debate amongst the scientific community. Do we live in a universe or do we live in a multiverse? Do we live in an absolute universe, one, or is our universe one of many universes? That's essentially what a multiverse is. And that debate has gathered some new momentum and is kind of gaining a little bit more prominence. And science tells us that all the evidence suggests we live in a universe. But you know what? Other bits of science tell us that all the evidence suggests we live in a multiverse. And that's kind of like the brilliance of science, actually, where science is meant to kind of propose things that we begin to look at and discuss and, get evidence about. But even with lots of those types of things, there's lots that is believed without really seeing. So I'm chatting to my friend, and he said, well, of course, Mark, it's all been disproved about God and the Christian faith. I said, why is that? He said, because you can't really see it. And in fact, we've proved quite the opposite that it happened. So not only can we not see it, but we actually proved it's not real. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Why do you say that? He said, well, clearly I can only really believe in things that I see. I went, oh, right, okay. How do you think we got here? He said, Big Bang. I said, oh, right. He said, was it loud? He said, what do you mean was it loud? I said, well, because when I hear a big bang, I proper jump, don't you? I spilt my cup of tea and everything sometimes, it's like, proper frightened me. So was it loud? He went, well, I don't know. I said, all right, okay. Was it was it hot? What do you mean? Was it bright? He said, well, what do you mean, was it hot and was it bright? I said, did you jump out of your skin when you heard it? He said, well, I wasn't there. I said, sorry, I thought you was. He said, well, I never said I was. I said, yes, you did. He said, and the words, I was at the Big Bang, never came out of my mouth. I said, no, you didn't say it explicitly, but you said it implicitly. He said, what do you mean? So you've told me you believe in the Big Bang, right? Yeah, okay, we'll agree on that. You've also told me that I can't believe in something I can't see. All right, so the logic is, you must have seen the Big Bang. He looked at me and said, I didn't. I said, I know. And I said, how come it's okay for you to believe what you believe, but you didn't see it, but it's not okay for me to believe what I believe because I didn't see it? Doesn't that feel a bit unfair? Doesn't that feel like that's not a level playing field, is it? And to be fair to him, and this is one of the things that I keep talking about with all this kind of apologetics and trying to reason, you know, we can hit kind of facts over a tennis net, but actually we need to just play around with some of the logic of this sort of stuff. The truth is most of us come to what we believe through not seeing. And as I intimated in the first session, through hearing and reading. But then people say to me, yeah, but Mark, it can't be proved, so I'm struggling. Okay, I want you to imagine that you're a classroom of children. Can you imagine that? Yeah, and let's have a couple of volunteers. Let's have you two. I'm not going to get you to do anything, it's just out. What's your name, my love? Farnoosh. Sorry? Farnoosh. Farnoosh, I like that. Where are you from, my love? Iran. Iran, lovely. And what's your name? Jill. Bit disappointing, that, isn't it? Can we try somebody else, Jill? Don't take that one. You were dreading that, weren't you? I'm sorry. No, Jill's good. I'm only joking. So, and where are you from, Jill?
London, England.
It's all right. You're allowed. It's all right. Jill from London, England. Okay. Right. So I want you to imagine that you're two really naughty girls. Can you imagine that? No. Yeah. Excellent, excellent. Now, okay, so you're the naughty girls. Right? You don't have to do anything. This is just for the sake of the illustration. You're all really well behaved. I'm not sure which is the easiest to believe here, okay? But now you've got to even stretch your imagination even more, and I'm a teacher. Thanks for not commenting too much on that one. Some of you did take a gulp. Okay, all right, you're holding hands. Look, you're worried, aren't you? So you're doing your work. So you're all busy away. You've got your heads down. You're studying. You're doing great. Totally unaware of these two lovely people here, okay? But you're messing about, right? You're kicking each other. Yeah, why not? All right, there's... Oh, steady. Have to get the stewards in a minute. She carried on, look, I love that. All right, now back in the day, we used to write on chalkboards. Do you remember those? Yeah, where you could pull your nails down them like that. And some of you are already like on the back of your nail. You've gone, haven't you, just there at the thought of it? Right, so this is the situation. I'm writing on the chalkboard, okay? I turn around, you're all at work, you're kicking each other and messing about, and I say, stop that, you two. And you both say, stop what, sir? We're not doing anything. And I'm going, you're kicking each other under the table. No, we didn't, sir. Yes, you did. I saw you. No, we didn't, sir. I saw you with my own eyes. No, you're too good at this. And you say, you can't prove it, sir. And you know what? They're absolutely right. I can't prove it to you. I don't have any scientific evidence to go off. I can't scientifically prove that they did or they didn't. I know they did. Why? Because I've got first-hand experience. But even if I have first-hand experience, the only person that I can prove something to is me or the persons involved. I can't prove it to the rest of you. You'll have to either decide, maybe by looking at the people, looking at their integrity, or potentially lack of it, I don't know, okay? Looking at me, that's not a dig, by the way, all right? But I still can't prove it to you. It still can't be proved. Even though I saw it actually happen, I was there at the moment in time, I still can't prove it to you. But it doesn't change the reality that it actually happened. I received a letter, illustration over, you can relax, thank you so much. I received a letter, and I was probably a little bit more excited. I probably ought to advance this slide. I got myself into a little bit of excitement then. I received a letter, and as I say, I was probably a little bit more excited than I ought to have been, but I was invited / summoned to do jury service. And I was really excited by this. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I thought this is like the closest I'm ever going to get into a courtroom situation, unless I've been a bad lad. Okay, and I'm not planning on doing that, you'll be pleased to know. So I was really excited, and it was fascinating. Because the jury's sworn in, 12 people, and then we have this little briefing session from the judge. And this is what the judge says. He says, I am the judge of the law. I'm here to make sure everything that happens is legal. That's my responsibility. Right? So he's an expert in the law to make sure that everything that takes place satisfies the law. Then he addressed us, the 12 members of the jury, and he said these words, you are the judge of the evidence. It's your responsibility to decide what the evidence is saying. And then he said, sometimes you'll wish you had another piece of evidence because you haven't quite got all the evidence you think you need to make your decision about whether the person was guilty or not guilty. But you don't have that evidence. You have to, purely on the basis of the evidence that you have before you, you have to make a decision. And here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes the only evidence we had was the word of a witness, and not even a secondary witness. We only had the witness of the person who was being accused and the one who was accusing. Essentially, the smacker and the smacked. That's the only evidence we had. But you know what? Our legal system deems that sufficient to be able to prove whether it happened or it didn't happen. My friend's a CID inspector, or retired now, and he said, Mark, there's very little that we can actually prove. We have to look at the evidence and say, is it beyond reasonable doubt? And that's the way our legal system works. We had to look at the evidence and say, is it beyond reasonable doubt that the person smacked or that they didn't? We can't even really take into account much of what the other defendant's saying in terms of other issues. This is the one issue we've got to look at. This is what's presented. Did the person do it or did the person not do it? Whether they caused it or not, those are almost sort of secondary issues. Did the person do it? And purely on just the simplest thing, the word of a witness. A little tiny digression. When we talk about the testimony and witnessing, they're kind of Christian words, aren't they? But actually, they're not. They're legal words. They're actually legal words. So a witness is a legal thing. It's noted down. It's deemed as sufficient evidence. And a witness gives their what? Their testimony. It's legal. It's admissible as evidence. And as I just mentioned a few moments ago, sometimes the only evidence. I want to say to you, at the risk here of doing a session on teaching you how to tell your story, what I do want to say is your testimony, legal, is a really valid piece of evidence. And I say this often to people when I'm talking around this subject with people that aren't Christians. You have to take what I say and my testimony as admissible evidence, because if you don't, you're not using even ground, even playing field. It's unfair. It's really, really interesting how people suspend what is rational when it comes to stuff pertaining to Christianity, and are quite willing to believe different or react differently to how they react with other things. And what's really, really fascinating is often science will make some declarations. I read recently a very small article. The Big Bang is actually, relatively speaking, quite a recent thing. It'd been thought about a little bit before, but it's only really been really prominent in fairly recent times. And the big headlines were, the Big Bang, this is it, this is how it all took place, this is how it all happened, etc., etc., etc. I read a little article in the Times about 18 months ago, a small article that said this about the Big Bang: we think we may have got it a little bit wrong. But the banner headlines, the big headlines, the Big Bang, this is how science has proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is the origins of how we got here. This is what we all got to believe. Science has proved it. Everything else is rubbish and wrong. Little tiny article. We think we might have not got it quite right. And unfortunately, this is what happens a lot with science. They prove one thing, and then a little while after they can prove that it's not quite right, and that's all kept a little bit quiet. And please, I'm not, if it comes across this way, I accept my apologies, but I'm not minimizing science. Actually, I'm valuing in it. And I'll tell you why I'm valuing it, because I think we've overemphasized its place in the world. And actually, we've put an awful lot of pressure on it. Whereas actually, if we value it and see what its real purpose is, then I think we can really celebrate it for all it's worth. And it's my firm opinion that science is only a discovery of what God's put in place anyway. So when it discovers things, we mentioned that briefly in the first session. But I think we've got to be careful, about saying what science has proved and disproved, because I don't think science absolutely has. And I think we've got to be careful about being fooled by those statements as well. But then people kind of move on to the next thing and say it's linked with this, that science has disproved it. So it's not just that science that it can't be proved, rather, but that actually science has gone like to the next step and say, well, actually it's disproved it. So I'm not a scientist. I think I've got a bit of a brain in my head, but I'm not a scientist. So I thought, right, how can I describe and articulate and communicate what science is? So I came up with this little analysis, and then I ran this out past a professor friend of mine, and he said, yeah, that's a good illustration. So this is my illustration of science. I'm just going to come here in front so that you can see me there. Okay, so this is my basic explanation of science. You take chemical A and mix it with chemical B, and you get a reaction which, for the sake of this morning, we'll call C. Are you with me? Yeah, so take chemical A, mix it with chemical B, and you get a reaction which we will call C. If you do that once, that doesn't prove that when you mix chemical A with chemical B, you get a reaction called C. That doesn't prove it. What that's shown is, in that instance, that's what's happened. Okay? So you got that so far, yeah? What you have to do is do the same experiment in exactly the same purity of environment with exactly the same purity of chemicals. So if you mix chemical A plus with chemical B and you get a reaction called C, you can't then say that when you mix chemical A with chemical B, we've proven you always get a reaction called C. You just can't do that. What you have to do is mix the pure chemical A with the pure chemical B. If you get exactly the same reaction C, and you've done that all in the same environment, under the same circumstances, identical, then you can say, when we mix chemical A with chemical B, we get a reaction called C. Does that make sense? That's essentially a simplistic description of science. Why is it a description of science? Because science works on the basis that something is repeatable and observable. That we can observe it happening, and when we repeat it, we get the same outcome. Therein lies a problem. You cannot prove God scientifically. He's there. He isn't going to happen again. So and we won't be there to do it, but that's irrelevant. You can't reproduce God again. He's never been produced. So you can't apply a scientific formula, a scientific premise to prove something that isn't a scientific experiment or the result of a scientific experiment. What you can do is seek to prove other things around, which then you then say proves. But there, a lot of Christians will talk about, from an evolution perspective, you still haven't found the missing link. Ladies and gentlemen, there's lots of missing links in the whole of science. We talk about there's lots of missing links. I'd love to meet Dawkins. I don't have a major problem with him. I'd love to chat with him. For many reasons, actually. But one of the things I'd love to suggest to him, because Dawkins is working on the basis there is no God, right? So he says if evolution is proved, we prove there is no need of God. That's what he says. Actually, that's a big jump. Logically, that's a big jump. I don't believe in evolution. My own slant is I believe in literal six-day creation. I've done a lot of study around it. I know there's lots of people out there that might differ, some within the Christian community, and that's their bag. I've got my own conclusions. But let me just say to you, if evolution was proved tomorrow, it wouldn't prove there is no God. It would simply prove evolution. But what's happened is Dawkins has then said, as lots of evolutionists have, by proving evolution, we've proved there is no need for God, implying, therefore, there is no God. Well, we've done two massive jumps there. First of all, we've said by proving evolution, we've proved there is no need of God. That's a massive jump, because you speak to most scientists and say there's still something missing. It's what they're trying to recreate in the Hadron Collider. What is it that kicked everything into existence? In fact, do they not call it the God particle? I love it. They're not quite bold enough. Do you remember the big advert on the buses between the atheist society and the secular society? There probably is no God, so start living. That was like the accumulation of all their brains for their branding and their advertising. There probably is no God, start living. My slant is there definitely is, start living. There's an assumption made that if you believe in God, you don't live. It's just ridiculous and farcical. So I have a problem with that, but then I also have another problem. So Mr. Dawkins, as we're drinking a nice cup of tea in Harrods, and I'm chatting to him, and I said to him, Mr. Dawkins, what you're suggesting there is that if evolution be proved, then actually what we're proving is that there is nothing about us that was intended. Nothing. It's all just by chance. That's what evolution talks about. That nothing that we are today was sat down. There's no intelligent design behind it. Therefore, there's no intention to it. It's just something that happened. So there is no part of our body that was intended to do what it now does. It's just a fluke. So that means everything that our body does is a fluke. That means that my brain was never intended to think. No comments on that. My brain was never intended to think. In fact, what my brain produces is no more than just a set of random collisions from things inside my brain, the byproduct of which are my thoughts, and we've called them thoughts. That means my brain was never intended to think about anything. That means my brain, if there is no intention in design, my brain can't be trusted. Because it could think one thing tomorrow and think something completely different, just random. That means that I can't trust anything that my brain interprets, even the facts about evolution. So I find it actually quite a conflict, and these statements that are made, when you break it down to the logical conclusion, actually, they just don't stack up. It's just not true to say that science has disproved it. What we're saying is we think certain conclusions about the evidence that we have before us. And by and large, Christians included, they support our bias. They support our bias. Well-known geophysicist Dr. John Baumgartner, a scientist at Los Alamos, laboratories. He's respected for his work on plate tectonics, you know, the shifting of the Earth's crust and volcanoes and earthquakes, etc. He's a Christian. Dr. Ian McCready is a highly respected scientist. He's at the forefront of research in a field which, to many minds, is most closely linked to evolution. He's a highly regarded Australian researcher into molecular biology and microbiology. He's the author of 60 research papers. Listen to this for a title. He's the principal research scientist at the Biomolecular Institute of Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. That's one big business card, isn't it? And he's the National Secretary of the Australian Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. Would you say he's a bright boy? Would you say he's a prominent scientist? He's also a Christian. Most university professors have one earned doctorate. Some members of the creation movement, for example, A.E. Wilder Smith, have the rare distinction of 3 doctorates. Sweeping statement, science has disproved it. Can't be proved, rubbish. Science has disproved it, rubbish. Science has proved a bias. And in truth, some of the most prominent scientists also say that actually science has proved their belief in God. So I think it's an interesting one to say science has disproved it or it can't be proved. And of course, the other reason that people would give for not believing is suffering. That would be one of the big ones, and we're going to look at that in the next session. So I'm not going to say anything about that. But the other thing that people say is, well, he's never done anything for me. Get that a lot. So I always say to people, what have you done for him? It's fair, isn't it? And people say to me, yeah, but I thought you Christians talk about, like, you know, you can't earn, like, your faith. You can't do stuff. Correct? We can't. Absolutely nothing we can do that gets us to God. But there is one thing that we must do, and when we do that thing, it opens us up to connection and interaction with God. And at this point, I would say to people, the one thing you have to do for God is to give him your life, give him permission. If you don't give God permission, he's not going to barge his way in, because as a world, we've kind of pushed him out. And so then I would just talk around that a little bit. I get to speak in lots of different, I'm completely knocking these down today, aren't I? Let's put them here and learn the lesson, okay? I get to speak in lots of environments. And this was a first. In fact, I don't think I've done it again. I was asked by a church, would you come and speak at a barn dance? I had visions of me kind of like healing and toe and sharing the gospel as I'm going round, you know what I mean? But that wasn't quite what they meant. We had a fish and chip supper because it was a northern do. And I spoke at this event. And this guy came to see me at the end. He was really angry with me. And I said to him, I did talk to you. I said, oh, you're angry, aren't you? Because I'm a bit sharp like that. And he said, I am. I said, because I want proof before I'll believe. I went, oh, right. What kind of proof do you want? He said, I don't know. I said, well, how will you know if it's proof then? You know what I mean? Like, help me out a little bit. Give me something to work with here. He said to me, unless God stands in front of me, I will not believe. I said, so let me get this right. The only way you will believe is if God stands in front of you so you can see him for yourself. Yes, then I'll believe. And I said to him, don't think you will. He went, I will. I said, no, I don't think you will. He said, no, I will. I went, no, I don't think you will. I mean, you might, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to say, I don't think you will. He said, why do you say that? I said, well, how would you know it was God? He said, well, I don't know. I said, so how would that prove it to you? He said, well, maybe he could say, he was serious, hello, I'm God. So I said, honestly, would that nail it for you? Do you know what I mean? And everything within me is wanting to go, come on, God, come now. Come on. It's easy for you, God. Just rock up, say, hi, I'm God, and get back to running the universe. You know what I mean? It's not a lot out of your time. Do it on your Sabbath. Do it on your Sabbath, all right? It's all right. And I said to him, I still don't think you'd believe. He went, I will. He was proper getting stroppy. I loved it. Didn't love it really. Maybe a little bit, all right? And I said to him, look, 2,000 years ago, God turned up on planet Earth and quite literally said, hello, I'm God. Some believed, some didn't. I suppose the ultimate proof of the reality of God is God himself rocking up and saying, hello. But even then, I don't think people will believe necessarily that he is God. And I said to this guy, you know, that the truth is, and he said to me, I knew you'd say that. I said, well, of course I'd say that, because that's what happened. I said, you've now got to, and I said, now this now delivers you a different conundrum, because we now have to work out whether Jesus was God or not. And I said, and if he was, then you've got something to do with it. Have you ever looked into that? He said, I haven't. So I said, you can't really say with absolute assurance that God has never turned up on our planet. You've got to now analyze this claim. And we're going to unpack more of that. But just in case I forget to say this in the session, I'm going to say it now. I think we've got to look at the way we talk about Jesus in evangelism. I believe that Jesus is the way, not the cross. I believe that the cross paid for the wrong and you know, overcame death. The resurrection overcame death and gave us life. Okay, this is very simple, all right? It's a little bit more complicated than this. I'm just giving you a snapshot. Just imagine you met me when I was born, and then you met me when I died. How could you make a judgment about what I was like as a person? And yet most of our evangelism, we talk about mainly the death of Christ. Sometimes we tiptoe into the resurrection, and sometimes we talk about the birth, but we never actually introduce people to Jesus. And so for me, it's really important that when I'm dialoguing with people, I want to introduce them to Jesus, because even the person of Jesus is some pretty powerful stuff there that we can learn and think about in terms of was he was God, what was it all about. I'm not going to say anything more on that, because I'm going to mention a little bit more about that in the end. But I said to this guy, you know, it's really critically important that you take a step of faith and believe that God is real. Because as I say, even if he stands up in front of you, you can still decide there is no God. So actually the truth is it reasonable to believe in things that we can't see? Yes, it is, and the truth is often what we can see, we don't believe. So that whole notion and logic of only believing what we see, I'm afraid I don't think really, really works. But then let me move on to kind of a bit more of a proactive presentation, and to say that actually it's not as daft as you think. It's not as crazy as you think. When I got married, my father-in-law very kindly paid for our honeymoon, and we went down to Mias in Spain. Anybody heard of Mias on the Costa del Sol? I think it is. Yeah, okay. Now in Mias, they've got this particular building. I don't know if anybody's been to see it. It's a bit of a tourist thing. It's the smallest museum in the world. Not particularly because of the size of the building, but because of what it contains. And what it contains is, for example, a naval battle with 37 aircraft and 12 ships painted on the head of a pin. A copy of Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper on a grain of rice. The Lord's Prayer on the edge of a business card. Okay, so who believes they're real things? Quick show of hands. Okay, who doesn't believe they're real things? Quick show of hands. Okay, interesting. When I first went, I was a bit cynical, because when I was a youngster, I used to do a lot of kind of tricks and magic-y tricks, some of the big illusions, you know, just the sort of making things disappear, they're called tricks, really. They're not real magic, for those of you slightly freaking out, okay? And I used to do these sorts of things, and they all work on certain principles, and so I knew these principles, and I was convinced this wasn't real. So when I went in there, much to the embarrassment of my good lady, I'm down on my knees, I'm tapping for false floors and looking for mirrors and all this kind of stuff. And from the outside of the museum, I was so cynical. No, not true at all. I got onto my hands and knees and started to investigate and started to look around. And I discovered that actually what the claims were, that these actually presented me with a bit of a challenge now. And it got to the stage where I finally accepted that these are real and true, to the point of when I got out to the last thing in the museum, I was almost unimpressed. Does that make sense? Because I'd been so I'd gone from being cynical and not investigating to accepting as the normal to actually becoming not impressed almost anymore. In other words, that it was like, well, of course it's true. Of course it's real. And I think sometimes for us as Christians, we can kind of lose some of the wonder, can't we, of the stuff that we first found hard to believe because we've kind of got used to it. We've kind of accepted it as norm. And kind of resultant from that is that we find it hard when people can't accept it too, like the miraculous and that type of stuff. And from the outside, it does look weird. It does look impossible. But actually, when you analyse it, even the logic of it is not as daft as you think. A friend of mine said to me, I struggle with the virgin birth. I said, why do you struggle with the virgin birth? He said, well, I struggle, and that stops me kind of like believing in Jesus. So I said, oh, well, tell me why. He says, because I can't believe that life just came out of nothing. I said, well, actually, life didn't come out of nothing. Life came out of something. I said, life came out of something that was another person. He went, all right, okay, well, I'm struggling with that. I said, okay. I said, how do you think we got here? I use this line approach a lot. So how do you think you got here? He went, evolution. I went, all right, so you believe in that we came out of nothing, and that's fine, but you can't believe in the virgin birth when life came out of something. That doesn't stack up to me. And in actual fact, what you've done is you've exercised greater faith in life coming out of nothing, and you struggle to exercise a smaller amount of faith to believe that life came out of something. And then I said to him, actually, you're misunderstanding anyway, because the virgin birth wasn't the beginning of Jesus' existence. It was the beginning of his existence on planet Earth. He already existed, so he didn't need to be made in normal fashion. This is just the way he entered our world. And when I placed it like that, my friend said, yeah, it's not as daft as I first thought it was. And actually, when you have a little look around, I mean, it's incredible. If you look up, you see a universe made up of billions of stars, so vast and distant that continuous new discoveries astonished astronomers. Years ago, it was estimated that there was 40 sextillion stars. That's 6 sets of 6 zeros. I mean, it's just crazy. I haven't got time to go into everything. On the Reason to Believe series, which we've recorded in CD MP3 format and DVD MP4 format, we cover more of these things. So the facts of them, I'm just going to leave with you because I'm delivering this more in an equipping context. So I want to let you into some of the thought processes behind rather than the information which you can glean from anywhere, even here. But listen to this. Scientists tell us that to count the atoms in 1 cup of water, it would take 186 billion years at the rate of 1 per second. It'd be annoying if you got that job and you were halfway through and your wife called you for your tea, wouldn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, we just take that as a given, don't we? We accept that. We don't go, that's mental. We just accept that. Love this. The archerfish predates our electronic age, but it can see an insect flying as high as 6 to 7 meters above the surface of the water, automatically calculating the angle of refraction. Do you remember that lesson? So where the insect appears, that's not where it is, because light's changed its position as it comes through the water. But the archerfish automatically calculates that angle of refraction, sends a drop of water from its mouth through the sea and hits the insect plumb on the head, and lunch obligingly drops into its mouth. When you hear 24,000 strings vibrate, a grand piano has 240 strings and is a mechanism 1 million times larger than the human ear. It's incredible, to the point where Isaac Newton one day was working on his desk, and one of his friends, a prominent atheist, came in to see him. And just by the side of his desk, he'd got one of these clockwork orreries. Have you seen them? If you haven't, you may now Google when you get home. It's one of these things that show the motions of all the planets. Beautiful piece of engineering, quite complicated, quite complex, and it's just gorgeous. And Isaac Newton's friend, this atheist, walked in and said, "Oh, where'd you get that from? That's absolutely beautiful." And Newton said, "Oh, nowhere, just appeared." And his friend knew exactly what he was getting at. Why is it that we look at something so simple like a MacBook 12-inch and we believe there was somebody behind this because it's amazing and intricate, and yet something far more intricate, far more amazing, we're happy to relegate to just simply being a random set of flukes? And what's crazy in all of that, something that's random, wasn't meant to do this, actually becomes a creator. It's an interesting slant, isn't it? So the things we produce are intentional, and yet people argue that we weren't intentionally produced. The philosopher Voltaire said if God didn't exist, he would have to be invented. What I've wanted to do today, and in a few months we're going to break for a few questions, is just to challenge this process, this notion of it being disproved and can't be proved, and then to move on to show actually just because it's difficult to get your head around doesn't mean that it's actually not real. And actually there's a lot of sense to believe, and it is reasonable to believe in a God you can't see. Let me just land this little section in just a couple of minutes to go back to something I mentioned, that the fifth reason that I think it's reasonable to believe is because many others believe, like me and like you. And I don't know about you, I draw great strength from listening to other people's stories. And this is the point, again, where I would always encourage you to share your own story, your own testimony. It's valid evidence. And it's powerful. Revelation says they overcame him, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb, which reminds us of the gospel, and the word of their testimony. It's really, really powerful. And with all of these things and all of these arguments, and we've only touched the surface today on this particular session, it's great to bring it back to your own personal story and admit this as evidence to lay before people.